On November 3, 1932, an Australian newspaper reported from Western Australia that the emus are more than holding their own. The line made an agricultural crisis sound like a battlefield. It helped create one of history's most durable jokes, that Australia declared war on emus and lost. That is not what happened. There was no declaration of war. There was no emu army. There was a small military detachment, Major Meredith, 2 other artillerymen, and 2 Lewis guns sent to assist a cull near Campion. But the story is not less remarkable when the joke is removed. It becomes a sharper account of returned servicemen settlement, Depression-era farming, native wildlife, political pressure, and the belief that military technology could quickly solve a problem created across an entire landscape. This is the real story behind the Great Emu War, and why its failure mattered to people who could not afford for it to be funny. After the First World War, governments encouraged returned servicemen to take up agricultural land. Western Australia's wheat belt was shaped in part by that settlement program. Not every farmer involved in the events of 1932 has been individually confirmed as a veteran, but the region carried the ambitions and burdens of soldier settlement. Then came the Great Depression. Wheat prices fell. Farmers faced severe financial pressure while trying to draw income from expanded planting. Into this cultivated landscape moved large numbers of emus, native birds responding to the conditions and resources of a dry country. Contemporary and later accounts estimated that as many as 20,000 entered the farming district. That was not a scientific census. It was an estimate of scale. The damage was not merely what the birds ate. Reports described crops being flattened and fences being damaged, creating further problems for farms already operating under strain. The emus were not invaders in the military sense. They had no objective, command, or strategy. Farming and fencing had changed the land through which native wildlife moved. The crisis emerged where animal movement met an agricultural system with little room for another loss. Farmers asked the government for stronger assistance. Commonwealth Defense Minister Sir George Pearce authorized military personnel to operate automatic weapons as part of a culling effort. Later accounts describe conditions over transport, accommodation, and ammunition, but the underlying authorization file was not inspected for this documentary. What is secure is the narrow scale of the decision, a small detachment, not a national mobilization. Major Meredith and 2 other artillerymen reportedly took 2 Lewis guns toward Campion. Accounts also describe an allocation of 10,000 rounds. That number matters, but it must be understood correctly. It was a reported allocation, not proof that every round was fired, and not a casualty count waiting to be divided into a neat ratio. Rain reportedly delayed the intended start by scattering the birds. ABC's reconstruction, drawing on contemporary newspapers, places the detachment at Campion on November 2, 1932. From the beginning, field conditions resisted the simplicity of the plan. Emus are mobile targets. When groups dispersed across open country, concentrating fire became difficult. Newspaper accounts describe disappointing encounters and at least 1 gun malfunction. Those reports cannot support a perfect, minute-by-minute reconstruction, but they establish the larger point. Automatic weapons did not translate into efficient control of a widely moving animal population. The press recognized the mismatch immediately. The emus are more than holding their own was not an official military assessment. It was newspaper language. Another contemporary illustrated page carried the title, The Emu War. War vocabulary turned a pest control operation into a contest with 2 sides, and gave the public an irresistible reversal. Meredith himself was quoted comparing the birds' resilience to tanks. The comparison captured frustration and helped the mythology grow. It was rhetoric, not zoology. The birds were not armored, trained, or organized. Reports disagree on the early results, but they were disappointing enough to bring withdrawal and ridicule. ABC's archival reconstruction dates the end of the first phase to November 8th, 6 days after operations began. Exact ammunition and kill totals for that phase conflict across retellings, so they cannot be presented here as settled facts. If this had only been a stunt, the story might have ended there. But the farmers' problem had not disappeared. Crop pressure continued, and Western Australian authorities renewed their request for help. ABC Associates, Premier James Mitchell, with the appeal that preceded reinstatement on November 12th, though the precise authorization trail remains to be verified in the defense records. The second phase reportedly produced more kills than the first, yet even the final numbers demand caution. Figures attributed to Meredith's report give 986 direct kills and 9,860 rounds used. These are reported operational totals, not independently audited counts. Claims that many additional wounded birds later died are projections, not observed casualty records. The numbers are often turned into a bullets per emu punchline. That calculation suggests a precision the evidence does not possess. It also reduces the event to a scorecard: ammunition on one side, dead animals on the other. The more important measure is whether the operation solved the problem it was sent to address. It did not. The cull killed birds but had limited impact on the larger agricultural problem. Emus continued to move across the region. Farmers continued to seek protection. A few guns could reduce numbers in particular encounters, but they could not control the ecological conditions that brought animals and crops into repeated contact. This is where the emus won becomes both understandable and misleading. The phrase expresses the public verdict on a costly-looking, politically exposed operation that failed to deliver a decisive solution. But no emu consciously fought, adapted a plan, or claimed victory. The operation became a symbol of failure because the wider problem remained, later summarized as an emu victory. The joke also distracted from harder questions. Why were struggling farmers left needing such an unusual intervention? Why was a military tool expected to manage a landscape-scale wildlife problem? And why did the operation's absurd appearance become more memorable than the agricultural policy that produced it? The military operation ended on December 10, 1932. That date ended the deployment, not the conflict between emu movement and farming. Longer-term policy relied on tools less dramatic than Lewis guns. Bounty schemes continued. Existing barrier fences, many originally built against rabbits, were adapted or extended over time to restrict other animals, including emus. Western Australian heritage records show that fence systems predated 1932 and that purpose-built emu fences appeared decades later in 1959. The distinction matters. The military cull did not suddenly invent fencing, nor did one humiliating operation produce an immediate, elegant solution. Western Australia continued modifying its approach across decades because the underlying ecological problem continued. That longer timeline also changes how we judge the decision made in 1932. Pierce's authorization can look uniquely absurd when isolated from everything around it. Set beside years of bounty payments, private shooting, trapping, and fence construction, it appears instead as one unusually visible experiment inside a much larger control effort. Its novelty was not that people tried to reduce emu damage. Its novelty was the use of serving artillerymen and automatic weapons, and the national attention that followed. The press could report each encounter as though it were a skirmish. Long-term management offered no such clean episode. A fence is maintained section by section. A bounty distributes killing among many people. Neither produces a single commander, starting date, or dramatic withdrawal. That helps explain why the military episode dominates memory, even though it was only a short part of the policy history. Fences also reveal what the war metaphor hides. A war imagines an enemy that can be defeated. A barrier management system recognizes movement across a landscape. The first framing assigns intention to an animal. The second acknowledges that agriculture, settlement, weather, food, and wildlife occupy the same physical system. That does not make later control policies simple or harmless. Culling continued to mean killing native animals to protect crops. Barriers redirected movement and required constant maintenance. The story is not a transition from foolish violence to perfect management. It is a history of people repeatedly trying to defend farms within an environment that did not conform to administrative boundaries. The newspapers won the memory battle. Their language gave the episode characters, fronts, setbacks, and a comic result. A three-man culling party became Australia. Mobile birds became a disciplined opponent. Limited impact became national surrender. The transformation began in 1932, not on the modern internet. Contemporary headlines were already treating events as an Emu War, and Meredith's tank comparison supplied exactly the kind of quotation that survives when policy detail fades. The joke depends on scale changing as the story travels. A Commonwealth minister becomes Australia. 3 artillerymen become the Army. A reported allocation becomes a mountain of wasted ammunition. Animals dispersing in open country become clever opponents. And an operation with limited impact becomes an official defeat. Each step is small enough to sound plausible. Together, they create a different event. Correcting that story does not require defending the operation. The method can still be judged against its purpose. It was highly visible, controversial, and unable to deliver durable protection to the farming district. The correction is simply that administrative failure is not the same thing as losing a literal war. Yet the surviving joke carries a trace of genuine criticism. The operation really did reveal the limits of a dramatic technological response. It really did become politically embarrassing. And it really did fail to solve the larger problem, even though some emus were killed. Australia did not declare war on emus. Emus did not organize an army. No government signed a surrender. What happened was more human and more instructive. Farmers under severe economic pressure reported serious damage. A government offered a visible, forceful intervention. 3 artillerymen brought weapons designed for war into an agricultural landscape. Newspapers turned the mismatch into comedy. And when the deployment ended, the landscape-scale problem remained. The Great Emu War survives because its popular version offers a perfect reversal. Humans arrive with overwhelming technology, and nature refuses to cooperate. But nature did not win. It exposed the weakness of the question. The question was never how to defeat an army of birds. It was how to build a durable farming system in a dry country shared with native wildlife, and whether a machine gun could substitute for that work. In 1932, near Campion, the answer was no.